It's fun to see them because they know it's a little bit scary. In fact, across the street from their house, there is a big cat. It's artificial, but it's in the lawn of the house right across the street, and the cat's head moves. It's mechanical, and it scares my granddaughter to death, but she's fascinated with it at the same time. So that's kind of what's wrapped up in Halloween, is there's a lot of fear there. And today I want to talk about fear of the future, because we have fear when we don't know what's coming. Do you ever realize that? There's kind of an anxiety. If I'm going to a new place where I've never been before, I'm going to meet some people that I've never met before. There's a little bit of fear that goes along with that. Years ago, we took our kids to Disneyland, and they were just opening a ride called Space Mountain. Maybe you've heard of it, or maybe you've been there. And when we got it, it's a roller coaster basically that's indoors in the dark. Now, roller coasters are scary enough when you can see what's going on, but when they're in the dark, I was petrified because I get motion sickness. But if I have a point where I can focus, then I'm not so bad. But in the dark, there's nowhere to focus and you don't know what's coming. But fortunately, there was just a little glimmer of light in there. And so I was able to make out the track as my eyes got adjusted just before the ride started. And I was able to see where the next turn was coming, just barely. And so it took a lot of that fear and anxiety away. And so today we want to take a look at what the Bible says is coming in the coming years and months ahead. So that it takes away the fear. It takes away all that anxiety. And just think about, we're looking back, 4 years ago maybe today, actually, 4 years ago on Halloween, I think some people were handing out candy here for the first time. And so, but I want you to not think that far back. Just think 2 years ago. Remember what the world was like 2 years ago? It was a different place. Think what's happened. In the last 2 years, we've had a nasty national election that has basically polarized our nation into two separate groups that hate each other. Basically, they're at each other's throats, threatening and just kind of crazy. And then also, after the election, we had the global pandemic, the coronavirus that we're all familiar with. And it put the whole world into lockdown. We weren't supposed to leave our houses there for a long time. And took away many of our freedoms that we're used to. For a while there, we couldn't go to restaurants. We couldn't go even to stores or without, strapping on 2-3 masks and making sure you had all your shots in line. And so it's taken away a lot of our freedoms. And it's still with us today. We're not out of the woods yet. And then we had George Floyd's death at the hands of a white policeman, black man, perished at the hands of a white policeman, that sparked not only racial tensions, but also a movement then to defund the police, which has led to more violence and more lawlessness. And this has all happened here within the last 1.5 to 2 years. And it's a different world now than what it was 2 years ago. And then with the pandemic, to combat people not being able to go to work, our government stepped in and paid people not to work. Which, sounds good on the surface, but it's resulted now in a supply chain shortage. Have you heard that phrase? Supply chain shortage. I had to look that up when I first heard it because I didn't know what they were talking about. But then the news showed a picture of a whole bunch of ships out at the harbor down in LA that aren't able to unload their goods because there are just not enough workers to unload them and not enough truckers to truck the stuff away. And so we've got this supply chain shortage all of a sudden. And you say, well, who cares? Well, when you go to the store and there's no paper towels or toilet paper on the shelf, it's because we have a supply chain shortage. And so now they're telling us you got to stock up, because who knows, maybe tomorrow there won't be anything there. So all this fear that is being, built up within. And then, if that weren't enough, illegal aliens have been flooding our southern border. Maybe you've seen some of this on the news. And putting a strain on already stressed resources like our schools and hospitals. Hospitals are filled to the brim, and now we're bringing more and more people in to an already stressed situation. Have you noticed that housing prices have been going up lately? And if you own a house, you're happy about that. Wow, my house is worth a lot more. But if you don't own a house, it's not good news, because you couldn't even afford a house before. How can you afford it now? I couldn't afford to buy my house today, but I don't know about you, but things have gone through the roof. And it's only exacerbated the homeless crisis. People living in tents in our cities, out on the freeways, under bridges. It's not a good situation out there. And now more and more stronger street drugs are out there, resulting in weirder and more bizarre behavior that you see in the news, destroying more and more lives. Saw the other night, they were talking about methamphetamines, and I know that meth is a horrible drug, but now they're saying it's even stronger than it was before and more devastating. So it's turning our streets and cities into asphalt jungles. People are afraid to go to Portland anymore, to downtown. You might get shot. You could. And then, if that weren't enough, we've gone through some climate changes. If you remember, just not too long ago, last winter, we had a big snow and ice storm, and resulted in trees falling. Maybe you had some, like I did, had some damage to your house or your fence. And then you tried to repair it, but the price of lumber was so high, you wondered if that was the right thing to do. It's destroyed billions of dollars in property damage. And then, last summer, I was never so glad to see the summer end, because it was hot. 116 degrees back in June. And there were like 3 days there where it was over 110 every day. And that led to sparking more massive forest fires and caused severe drought. So anyway, I'm just scratching the surface. There's more things, there's more doom and gloom we could talk about, but just that is overwhelming. And all this has happened our world has changed in the last couple of years. And so, you might ask the question, especially as Christians, because we know the Bible talks about the end of the world, you might ask, is this the end? In fact, I have never heard Christian people so much talk about the end times and Christ returning as I have here in the last 2 years. And maybe you can vouch for that. And maybe you're wondering yourself, is this the end? Well, Jesus had some things to say about this in Matthew 24 and Mark 13. We're going to look at those 2 chapters today, and then actually some verses out of Daniel in the Old Testament. But Jesus said in Matthew 24:3, "Now as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, 'Tell us, when will these things be?'" Because Jesus was talking about the end times. "And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" So the disciples were interested in this, just as we are today. So number one in your notes, finally getting to the meat here, no one knows exactly when Jesus will return. Nobody knows. Not even Jesus. He said in Mark 13:32, "But of that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone." Now, you remember we were talking about the Trinity here a few months ago? And here's another case to show that there are 3 separate persons in the Trinity. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Because Jesus, as the Son, said that he doesn't even know. when the time is. The Father knows, and so they're two separate people. But it also tells us that it's very foolish to try and set a date for the return of the Lord. Now, some groups have tried to do this. Some individuals have tried to sell a lot of books by saying, you know, in the next 6 months this could happen or that. And whenever somebody sets a date, you can be sure of one thing: it's not going to happen on that day. Jesus is not coming back. So it's foolish to try that. But number two, Jesus does give us, but Jesus gives us things to look for so that we should know that his coming is near. He gives us some hints. He says, when you see these things happen, then you know that the time is near. And that comes out of Mark 13, verses 28 and 29. Jesus said, now learn the parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. Even so, you too, when you see these things happening, recognize that he is near, right at the door. So if you went out in your backyard this afternoon or earlier today, or just right out here in the street, it wouldn't take Einstein to notice that the leaves are falling. And even my 2-year-old granddaughter knows what season it is, because she went out in our backyard and she says, the leaves are falling. And she was concerned about that. She wanted them to go back up. But, you know, it doesn't work like that. We call this season fall. And we know when the leaves start falling that winter is right around the corner. And you got to get ready. You know, Lyndon was just sharing with me before the service that yesterday he was up on his roof fixing things, getting ready for winter. And so I asked him if he could come over on my roof and get that fixed too. But not buying it. But anyway, when we see these things happen, and Jesus said, when you see leaves, the leaves start to bud, you know, on your tree, then you know that summer is not too far away. And in the same way, when we see these things, and we're going to talk about a few of them here in the little bit of time we have, when we see these things start to happen, we know that the return of Christ is near. All right. And I want to talk a little bit, well, let's go on to number 3. Number 3 says, don't worry about wars. Now, whenever a war breaks out, people get anxious, people get nervous, like, oh, this could be the end. And there's always wars coming along. But don't worry about wars, Jesus said. That means business as usual. But when you see, here's what to look out for. When you see world peace, especially concerning Israel, then know that Jesus is coming. You say, wait a minute, Steve. Isn't Armageddon the big war at the end? Yes, there's Armageddon is coming. But that doesn't happen until the end of the tribulation, is Armageddon. And we're not there yet. We're going to talk about 7 years of tribulation. So what do we want to look for before the return of Christ, the rapture, when we're taken up? What you want to look out for is not wars, but world peace. And you say, where do you get that? I get that because you've all heard about the Antichrist. And the Bible has a lot to say about this personality, this individual that is going to come to power. And could even be, if we are in the last days, the Antichrist could be alive right now. Could be being prepared. And let's talk about him a little bit. He is going to be a very enticing personality. He's going to have a super personality that just has charisma that draws people to him. I had a client, this has been several years ago, but she was elderly, and this was back when I was in the financial services business, and she had quite a bit of money in her account. And so she was elderly, but she loved, as a younger woman, she loved to dance. That was her hobby, was dancing. And so one day she came in and she said, I found a dance studio, And she said, it's the best place, and there is this instructor there, and he is so good with us elderly people. And she said, so I've signed up there, I've joined, I paid the admission, and I was happy for her that she had found something she wanted to do. But then a few weeks later, she came in, she said, I need to take some money out of my account because I'm going on a cruise. And I said, well, that's wonderful. Where you going? She said, oh, I'm going with my dance group. And she said, our instructor is going to lead us, and we're going, I can't remember where they went. But anyway, to make a long story short, over the next few months, I saw more and more money going out of her account. And she had been so taken with this young dance instructor, and he was bilking her. He was promising her all these things, and even saying romantic things to her, in order to take advantage of her, in order to drain her bank account. And so I alerted her family, and she wasn't happy about that. But anyway, you know what I'm talking about there. And it doesn't just happen with elderly women, it happens with elderly men as well. They'll meet a charming young lady, and all of a sudden, all the money's gone. So that's the spirit of the Antichrist. That's what we're talking about here, is Jesus said he could even deceive us Christians if we're not careful. He says in verse 24, for false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. That's us Christians. See, I have told you beforehand. So Jesus warns us that we need to be on the alert and on the lookout. So anyway, now we're going to switch over and talk in the Old Testament about Daniel. And this actually comes out of Daniel chapter 9. If you could follow along with me, this is the longest part of our sermon today. It comes out of Daniel 9, verses 25 to 27. I'm reading out of the New International Version. And I put some words in this verse in italics, or parentheses actually, and I highlighted them. These words that I put in there are not actually in the Bible. These are words that I put in to help explain this prophecy passage. So just a disclaimer there. And so in Daniel 9 it says, know and understand this. From the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, until the anointed one, the ruler, which is Jesus, comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. All right? So here's how Daniel starts out. Now remember, this was before the time of Christ. Actually, almost 500 years before the time of Christ, Daniel was writing this. And he had this prophecy that said there's going to be 69 weeks. Now, weeks in prophecy, and here in New International Version, it says groups of 7, sevens. That means groups of 7 years. So 69 groups of 7 years. Harry could do the math on that. I don't have that right at my fingertips, but it's a whole bunch of years, like 483, something like that. Thank you, Frank. So anyway, what Daniel was saying, from the time the decree goes out to rebuild Jerusalem, and in our Bibles it actually tells us that Cyrus, the king of the Persian Empire, he gave a decree to rebuild Jerusalem. That was in the days of Nehemiah. Nehemiah worked as a cupbearer for Cyrus, the king, and Cyrus had so much compassion for the Israel people that were in exile, and so he made a decree that Jerusalem, back in the old country, was to be rebuilt, and he put Nehemiah in charge of that. So this actually happened, and Daniel was saying 483 years from that date that, what did he say there? The anointed one, Jesus, comes there, and there will be 7 sevens, 62 sevens. It, Jerusalem, this is the city, this can be rebuilt, will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. So those 490 years between Daniel and Jesus, yes, the city did get rebuilt. And if you read the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, it explains how the process went. It was a slow process, and it wasn't without opposition. It was tough times, just as this says. All right, then in verse 26 it says, after those 62 sevens, or if you add the 7 in, it was 6, after those 483 years, the anointed one, who is Jesus, will be put to death and have nothing. Did Jesus, was he put to death?
Yep.
Yeah, he was. And if you pencil it out, it's actually to the very day, the very year when Daniel prophesied that. So he would be put to death. And the people, and in parenthesis there, it says the Roman Empire. And listen to this. The people of the ruler who will come. Now the ruler who will come is the Antichrist. So the people of the ruler who will to come will destroy the city, Jerusalem, and the sanctuary. The sanctuary, he was referring to the sanctuary of the temple, the Jewish temple. So, when you put that together, who were the people that destroyed Jerusalem and tore down the temple? The Romans, right? Remember in Jesus' time, the Romans were in charge, and Jesus looked out on the temple, and the disciples said, isn't that such a great building? And Jesus said, yeah, it is, but you know what? There's going to come a day when not one stone will be left on top of another. And what he was talking about was in 70 AD, about 35 years, 37 years after Jesus died, the Romans were going to come in, and they had enough of the people of Israel, and they destroyed the temple, and they didn't leave one stone on top of another. And they destroyed the whole city of Jerusalem, and that's prophesied here almost 500 years ahead of time. And so from those people, notice that it said, the ruler who will come. The Antichrist then will come. I believe he was telling us he will come from a revived Roman Empire. And you say, well, the Roman Empire is gone. It's way gone. No, not really. Have you ever heard of the European Commonwealth? And yeah, it's a real thing, right? And that's where a bunch of nations, around 10, actually there's more than that now, but Great Britain actually has pulled out from it, but there's still Greece and Italy and Spain and Switzerland and Germany and Scotland and Ireland. All these European nations have banded together and formed a European Commonwealth. They have all the same currency now. That wasn't true in the beginning, but now they all have this thing called the euro. If you go to Europe, you will exchange your dollars for euros, and you won't get as many of those as you do with the dollar. But anyway, this is prophesied. I believe that it's going to be a ruler that comes out of this revived Roman Empire, the European common market as we know it today. All right, then it finishes up by saying, the end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end. Now, has there been war in the Middle East, in Jerusalem, around Palestine? Yeah, almost all the time, right? If you've ever studied the Crusades, it was all wars trying the Europeans were trying to win back Jerusalem, and the Arab people were in there too and fighting each other. And Jesus was talking about that's going to continue until the end. And he's talking about the end of the church age. That's this age that we have now. All right. And desolations have been decreed. And then verse 27, it says, he, referring to the Antichrist, he will confirm a covenant with many. And this is what we're talking about, world peace. For 1 7. Now remember, 7 represents 7 years. And in the middle of the 7, in the middle of those 7 years, 3.5 years, which is the tribulation, those 7 years, he, the Antichrist, will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And at the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end, and that's the end of the tribulation. All right. So what's that saying? It's saying that the Antichrist will work a world peace. He will confirm a covenant with many, and that's all the nations. Because I don't know if you've noticed, but even today, almost every nation is against Israel, except the U.S. We're like the one ally that, and even the U.S. is not always the friend of Israel. Historically we have been, and that is even changing today. So that almost every nation is against Israel. And this Antichrist is going to so-called solve that by bringing world peace. There won't be war anywhere, and it's this covenant with the many. And that's why I say that you have to watch out for world peace, not wars. Wars, that means everything's going along just as Jesus said it would. But when you see world peace on the horizon, and could that happen today? It could. Now, number 4. Earthquakes, famines, natural disasters, and pandemics, which are called pestilences in Matthew 24:7, will become more and more frequent. Now that would never happen, right? No, we're living through that, aren't we? It's happening more and more. You're hearing about earthquakes and floods and tornadoes and hurricanes and all these natural disasters, forest fires like we've never had them before, and more frequent. And Jesus said there will be earthquakes in various places. There will also be famines. These things are merely the beginning of birth pangs. Have you ever had birth pangs?
No.
No, you haven't. But some of you have. And some of us have observed people that have had them.
Yes.
And what I take away from that is that in the beginning, the birth pangs are like few and far between. And it's like, well, that was a false alarm. Why are we worried about that? And then they become more and more frequent until finally the baby comes. And it just all works up to this crescendo. And Jesus said that's the way it's going to be in the end times. These natural disasters are going to be becoming more and more frequent. And when you see that happen, know that the end is near. Know that the Lord is about ready to return. All right, Romans 8:22 says, "For we know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now." So that's saying that the earth that we live in, this creation, even the earth, with earthquakes and volcanoes and all these tornadoes and natural disasters, the earth groans and suffers until childbirth. All right. Now, finally, number 5, Jesus said, is that the last one? Yeah. Jesus said that when we get close to his return, Christians will come under more and more persecution. Now, I don't think this one has quite happened yet, but it seems to me like it could happen very soon. In Mark 13, Jesus said, "Be on your guard, for they will deliver you to the courts, and you will stand before governors and kings for my sake as a testimony to them. Brothers will betray brother to death, a father his child, and children will rise up against their parents and have them put to death. You will be hated by all because of my name." Now, like I said, I don't think this is happening yet, but I think we could be close. Have you ever heard of the First Amendment? And the First Amendment, I can't tell you exactly what it says, but it says something like this. You can say what you want to say, even if you don't agree with the establishment. You can say any crazy thing you want to say. And we've all witnessed that a lot of crazy things get said, but it's always under the protection of the First Amendment. There are certain venues where your speech today can get deleted. Did you notice that? Social media. They have a name for it called the cancel culture. And what happens is if I say something that isn't politically correct or by somebody's standards, they can delete that. They can take that away. And it's kind of infringing on our First Amendment rights. Not only that, but I've even seen some instances where you could lose your job. If you say something that's not exactly right, and you've all heard of these things in the news where some high-profile people have said things that didn't exactly line up with the party line, and they lost their job. Is it a stretch? Would it be a stretch to see where someone could get arrested for disagreeing with the party line? I don't think we've come to that yet, but could we? Yeah, we probably could. You wouldn't have to have too much of an imagination to see that happening. And what about this book here that we love and adore and study and meditate on and learn? Is it exactly politically correct? I don't know if you've read it, but if you have, you may have come across some things in here that do not go along with what you might call the new morality. Have you noticed that? Could someone get deleted for teaching what this says? Yeah, sure. Could you lose your job?
Yep.
Probably. I mean, I don't know that anybody has, but maybe some have. Could you get arrested?
Not yet.
Not yet, no.
Getting close.
And let's hope that we are not there yet. But could we get there?
Yep.
Could it be sooner than we think? Yeah. And what did Jesus say? My whole point is not necessarily that this could happen, but my whole point is that if it is happening, we're close to the return of the Lord, aren't we? Isn't that what he was saying? When you see these things happen, then get ready, because it's happening. All right. We could be closer than we think. And my question to you is, are you ready? Are you ready for the return of the Lord, for the trumpet to sound and the dead in Christ to rise, and we who are alive to join them, meet the Lord in the air? Are you ready for that?
Yes.
If you've never received Jesus as your personal Savior, you're not quite ready. And that's why at the end of every service, almost, we always we remind you that we need to make that commitment.